Isaac Finn was not the type of journalist who settled for ordinary stories. He made a name for himself by uncovering obscure mysteries, stories that others left behind in favor of safer topics. But this time, as he sat at his cluttered desk poring over an ancient map, he felt a strange sense of unease. The city he was looking for, a town called Halloway, had been mentioned in obscure documents dating back centuries. According to these sources, Halloway would appear on maps periodically but would vanish just as quickly. Sometimes it was visible only to certain people, other times it could be stumbled upon accidentally, though rarely. The reports were scattered, inconsistent, and maddeningly vague, yet for all its contradictions, every mention of Halloway came with a similar warning: those who found the city seldom returned. Isaac, however, was not one to shy away from such warnings. It all started a few days ago when he received a letter at the office. The envelope was plain, without a return address, but it bore an old faded seal that caught his attention. The letter inside contained only a single line: "Find Halloway, and you'll find the truth." There was no signature, no hint at who might have sent it, yet the phrasing was enough to intrigue him. Find the truth. The line played in his mind like a forgotten melody. Isaac had been in the news business long enough to know that true stories often came disguised as myths. He quickly realized that any ordinary investigation would not work here. He would need more than library archives and newspaper records. So, he began his search in his own unorthodox way, contacting anyone who might have heard of Halloway. Days passed, and he was nearly ready to give up when he received an unexpected message on his phone. An anonymous email that read simply: "Follow the river at dusk." Confused but intrigued, Isaac packed a small bag, grabbed his notebook, and made his way to the edge of the city where an old winding river marked the boundary between urban life and the vast wilderness beyond. It was almost dusk by the time Isaac reached the river. The setting sun cast a strange reddish glow over the water, and a faint mist began to rise from the surface. For a moment, he thought he saw something in the distance, a flicker of light, almost like a faint glimmer on the horizon. He walked along the riverbank for nearly an hour, searching for any sign of Halloway. Just as he was about to turn back, he saw a narrow bridge that wasn't on any map. It was old, overgrown with vines, and looked as though it hadn't been used in years. With no other options, he crossed the bridge. On the other side, Isaac felt a subtle change in the air, as if he had stepped into another world. The trees were denser, the shadows darker, and the silence was almost overwhelming. Then, in the distance, he saw a small town nestled among the trees. It looked like something out of a forgotten dream, with weathered buildings and narrow streets shrouded in mist. Isaac's heart raced as he approached the town. He took out his notebook and wrote a single line: "I have found Halloway." The town was eerily quiet as he entered. The buildings, though old, were well preserved, with architecture that seemed both familiar and alien. There were no street signs, no indication of where he was, yet everything seemed deliberately placed, as if someone had carefully designed the layout. As Isaac wandered through the empty streets, he began to notice faint sounds: whispers, footsteps, the distant clatter of something metallic. He turned a corner and saw an elderly woman sitting on a bench, staring blankly into the distance. When he approached her, she looked at him with an expression of surprise, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice her. "Excuse me," Isaac said. "Could you tell me where I am?" The woman looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "They don't like visitors." "Who are they?" Isaac asked, but the woman shook her head, muttering something he couldn't quite hear before hurriedly walking away. Isaac continued down the street, feeling an increasing sense of unease. He passed a small cafe, its windows fogged over, yet he could see shapes moving inside. A shadow crossed his path, and when he turned, he caught a glimpse of a man in an old-fashioned coat disappearing around the corner. Isaac tried to follow him, but when he reached the corner, the man was gone. That night, he found an inn at the edge of town and rented a room. The innkeeper was a middle-aged woman with a wary expression who handed him a key without asking any questions. As he lay in bed that night, Isaac could hear faint whispers from the floor below, fragments of conversations, laughter, and the occasional cry. Isaac awoke early, but as he checked his watch, he realized something strange: the time was wrong. He had gone to bed around 11 p.m. Yet his watch now read 3 p.m. The following day, How could he have slept through an entire day? Confused, he hurried downstairs, hoping to find the innkeeper. The inn was empty, silent except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. When he glanced at the clock, he noticed the hands were moving backwards, counting down instead of forward. Before he could make sense of it, he heard a voice behind him. "You're not supposed to be here," the voice said. Isaac turned to see a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes standing in the doorway. He wore clothes that looked as though they belonged to another era, dark, heavy, and meticulously clean. The man looked at Isaac with an expression of both pity and amusement. "Who are you?" Isaac asked. The man smiled. "I am simply a guide," he replied, "but you should leave before it's too late." "Halloway is not a place for strangers." Isaac tried to ask more, but the man disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. Feeling more unsettled than ever, Isaac decided to leave the inn and explore the town further. As he wandered through Halloway, Isaac began to notice strange patterns. The streets seemed to rearrange themselves, leading him in circles no matter where he went. Every now and then, he would see glimpses of people, but they were always gone by the time he got close. The few townsfolk he managed to speak to gave cryptic responses, avoiding his questions and warning him to leave. But despite their warnings, Isaac felt an inexplicable pull to stay. There was something about this town, something hidden beneath its eerie silence, that he needed to understand. After a few days, Isaac noticed something even stranger. The dates on his phone and watch didn't match reality. Each day, time seemed to move backwards, as if he were slipping further and further into the past. One evening, he came across an old newspaper in a deserted shop. The headline read, "Journalist found dead in Halloway, missing for 10 years." The photograph attached was of a man who looked exactly like him. Panic rose within him as he realized he was looking at his own obituary. Isaac finally understood the truth. Halloway wasn't just a town, it was a place that existed outside of time, a trap for those who wandered too far into its secrets. The people here were lost souls, remnants of those who had tried to leave but were forever bound to Halloway. Determined to escape, Isaac retraced his steps back to the bridge, hoping to find a way out. But as he approached the edge of town, he realized with horror that the bridge was gone, replaced by an endless forest. Halloway had taken him, just as it had taken everyone else who had tried to leave. Isaac wandered aimlessly through the forest that had replaced the bridge, each step growing heavier. Trees seemed to close in around him, their branches reaching down like skeletal hands. But when he glanced back, he saw Halloway still looming just behind him. It was as if the town were moving with him, unwilling to let him go. As he tried to find a way out, Isaac noticed eyes watching him from behind trees and through the fog. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, people silently observing him from the underbrush. The townspeople, it seemed, were watching his every move, making sure he didn't escape. He picked up his pace, trying to shake off the feeling of being haunted. But the faster he moved, the closer the shadows seemed to draw. After what felt like hours, Isaac found himself back in Halloway, standing in the same spot where he first entered. His mind reeled with confusion no matter which way he went. He couldn't seem to leave. Desperate, Isaac decided to seek answers from anyone who would speak to him. He made his way to the inn where he had stayed his first night, hoping the innkeeper might have more information. As he entered, he saw her polishing a mirror behind the counter, her eyes fixated on the glass as if she were looking at something beyond her own reflection. "Excuse me," Isaac began, but the innkeeper held up a hand, silencing him. She pointed at the mirror, where Isaac saw something that made his blood run cold. In the reflection, a man stood behind him, a stranger with hollow eyes and a face that was gaunt and twisted. The figure's mouth moved, whispering something Isaac couldn't hear. "Do you see him?" the innkeeper asked softly. Isaac nodded, feeling a chill creep down his spine. Who is that?" "He's one of the lost," she replied. "A soul trapped in Halloway, like you will be if you don't find your way out." Isaac's stomach twisted. "How to escape?" She looked at him with pity. "The town chooses who stays and who goes. If it wants you, there's little you can do." But Isaac refused to accept that. Driven by fear and determination, he decided to investigate further, hoping there was still a way out. In a small building at the town's edge, Isaac discovered a dusty library filled with old records, maps, and journals left behind by former residents. The shelves were lined with books and papers documenting Halloway's history. some dating back centuries. As he sifted through the records, he found countless entries about travelers who